Welcome, everyone. We will now have an opening invocation written and delivered by Mumia Abu-Jamal. At this time, we remind you to silence your cell phones for the remainder of the event. Thank you.
Dear friends, sisters, and brothers, and to our non-binary siblings, I thank you all for joining with us tonight as we announce the opening of these archives at Brown University. What is the significance of such an action? Let me pose the question from another perspective. What is the significance of the American prison? In a way, we might ask, what does Japan mean without Mount Fuji? What is Tibet without the Himalayas? This suggests that the prison is a natural structure born of accretion over time. But what it has a solidity and a weight that approximates mountains. Prisons are man-made structures crafted by human antipathy. The American prison system, until quite recently, held more juvenile lifers than any other jurisdiction on earth. Indeed, Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, standing alone, more than any other jurisdiction on earth were imprisoned as juvenile lifers here. More than any other jurisdiction, any other country on earth. So, not so much a mountain as a dark tower looming over the fevered dreams of millions, promising nothing but extinction. That world can be glimpsed by the archives before you. And beyond that, the crippling reality of death row. And ultimately, life. Sentences with no end, or what I call slow death row. We begin here, but we do not end here. For our journey has just begun. Again, to you all, welcome with love, not fear. This is Mumia Abu-Jamal.
In Mumia's words, we welcome you with love and not fear. My name is Nicole Gonzalez Van Cleve, and I'm an associate professor of sociology at Brown University. And I'm also the founder of the Mass Incarceration Lab, which works to preserve the stories and writings of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people as part of the John Hay Library's permanent collection. We believe that one cannot understand the system of mass incarceration without centering the voices of those most impacted. So I am very honored to be here tonight, and I am looking at this audience, and I am feeling overjoyed that we're here together. Because back in 2012, I was looking upon a similar crowd in Philadelphia, the city that Mumia called home. I was set to speak on a symposium panel with Mumia. Picture about 300 people waiting in anticipation. And as I sat on stage, we received word that the prison guards had abruptly and unilaterally decided that it wasn't to be. Mumia would not be allowed to speak, and there were some excuses about a lockdown that happened exactly when he was set to have his voice heard. I never forgot that moment because it showed that beyond warehousing people away from society, silencing so publicly and ceremoniously was just another form of carceral control. Well, tonight, we're doing something big. And I made a promise in my mind, and well, this is what I envisioned. But I have to say, I never imagined that it would be on a scale and with these visionaries all coming to the stage to reflect on their fight to bring Mumia home and bring his papers, writings, and scholarship to Brown University, where it will live on for generations. Tonight, I have the great honor to be an ambassador for the Pembroke Center, which has been instrumental to the fight to bring Mumia's archive to our university. And this struggle has truly been a feminist struggle. The Pembroke Center is the feminist research center devoted to critical scholarship on struggles faced by people nationally and transnationally. The Pembroke Center Archive serves to preserve the papers of cis and trans women, non-binary people at Brown University, as well as the papers of feminist and queer theorists in the academy. In 2021, Mary Murphy, the Nancy L. Buck Pembroke Center archivist, became interested in acquiring the papers of our panelist, Johanna Fernández, Brown class of 1993. And the collection interests Murphy because it documents Fernandez's personal history, activism, and her work as a prominent historian of radical movements. And it is through this curatorial effort, centering women's history, that Murphy would go on to curate the papers of Mumia Abu-Jamal, which were stored in Fernandez's home. As a historian by trade, Johanna knew the magnitude of what she was preserving and what it meant. Archives make history. Losing a collection would be a purposeful act of historical erasure, because in the same way they silenced Mumia on a panel, they no doubt would have thrown away his writings, which sustained, empowered, and connected him to his loved ones and to community over his 40 years of imprisonment. This includes famous thinkers and scholars who all saw the value of Mumia as a writer and thinker. This curatorial effort required 2 years of difficult work in partnership with the John Hay Library, as well as faculty from the Center of the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America, the Ruth J. Simmons Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, and students, many of who are in the room from Brown University. We thank the university leadership for their efforts in making all this work possible, because now Brown is the first research library in the United States that has acquired a large-scale personal collection of a currently incarcerated American. So who is Mumia Abu-Jamal? Once referred to as the most recognized death row inmate in the world, Mumia is an American political activist, journalist, scholar, and incarcerated person. Prior to his imprisonment, Abu-Jamal co-founded the Philadelphia Black Panther Party, served as the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, and supported the MOVE organization as an activist and radio journalist. Since 1982, Abu-Jamal has maintained his innocence and fought his conviction for the 1981 murder of a Philadelphia police officer. Abu-Jamal was sentenced to death, remaining on death row in solitary confinement for 28 years until 2011. He is currently serving a life sentence without parole and has been in prison for 42 years. We mark this opening to this collection of Mumia's papers by centering the feminist struggle to bring Mumia home and to center Mumia's voice in spite of the walls that separate us. Each of the visionary figures on this panel have contributed their labor and genius to the cause of freeing Mumia, demanding fair due process and advancing the goal of prison abolition. Their fight for Mumia is a broader struggle for the more 2.5 million people held in prisons across the United States and millions more that are held across the globe. So let me introduce our visionary panelists here with us tonight. We have Professor Angela Y. Davis. Woo! Angela Y. Davis is the Distinguished Professor Emerita of History of Consciousness and Feminist Studies at the University of California, Santa Cruz, an activist, writer, and lecturer. Her work focuses on prisons, police, abolition, and the related intersections of race, gender, and class. She is the author of many books, from Angela Davis, an autobiography, to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. We have Professor Johanna Fernández. Johanna Fernández is an associate professor of history at Baruch College in the City University of New York. She is the author of the award-winning book, The Young Lords, A Radical History, as well as a writer and producer of the documentary Justice on Trial, The Case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Dr. Fernández 2014 Freedom of Information lawsuit against the New York City Police Department led to the discovery of the lost Honshu files, the largest repository of police surveillance record in the country between 1954 and 1972, including those of Malcolm X. We have with us online Julia Wright. Julia Wright is the elder daughter of Richard Wright and the executor of his literary estate. She has worked as an independent journalist and essayist in France, West Africa, and the United States, where US-based and international publications have carried her pieces. A longtime abolitionist, she ensures a liaison with the United Nations Human Rights Council to protect the rights of imprisoned journalist and writer Mumia Abu-Jamal. And our moderator, Professor Tricia Rose. Tricia Rose is Brown University Chancellor's Professor of Africana Studies, Associate Dean of the Faculty for Special Initiatives, and the Director of the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America. Rose specializes in 20th century African American culture and politics, social thought, pop culture, and gender issues. Her current work illuminates how anti-Black racism works across multiple interlocking spheres of US policy, practice, and beliefs. She's the author of Black Noise, Longing to Tell, and The Hip Hop Wars. Her new book on systemic racism, meta-racism, will be released in March of 2024. Today's panel will be followed by an audience Q&A. So without further ado, and with all the energy you brought to those bios, please welcome all our panelists.
Thank you so much for coming. Can you hear me? It's okay? So I was going to tell Nicole, you did a fantastic job, and then I was going to say, note to self, never introduce Angela Davis first. Because these women are amazing and can hang in there, but the rest of us mere mortals, you know, I definitely made a note. So we're just so delighted to have everyone here and really think and talk together. I'm going to jump right in talking with these amazing women activists, thinkers, scholars, and then we will have some time to open it up for questions from you, okay? I want to just start with just a simple question, but I think there's a lot in it, which is, you know, why is it that you think women are at the heart of the campaign for freeing Mumia? What are the gendered components of that? Now, there's an assumption in that, maybe it's just random, right? But I suspect that there's some characteristics. And I think I'll start with you, Johanna, and then we can just have everyone participate, Julia, when we get to you.
All right, I thought that was going to be a question for Angela Davis. First of all, I'm just honored to be here alongside of Angela Davis, Tricia Rose, and Julia Wright. I took biology in this classroom a million years ago. But before I start, I just got a text, and by the way, my phone is gonna ring because I'm waiting for an important call. And I just got a text from Gabe Bryant, who's one of the people who's leading the movement to free Mumia Abu-Jamal and who's fighting for abolition and to bring all of our brothers and sisters home. And he tells me, this is very exciting, and I'm so glad that it came together this way. This is inspiring people around the country and around the world who don't just want to see Mumia home, but who are fighting for a world without prisons. For an institution like Brown University to take this bold step in the face of criticism in this atmosphere that we're living in politically is huge. And for me personally, I feel that for the first time, I'm coming home. I was part of Students for Aid and Minority Admission here at Brown, a student movement that occupied University Hall because Brown admission was need aware. That means that it looked at students' ability to pay before admissions. And I was part of the first class that was admitted with this new need blind policy. And I was just a kid from the Bronx. But coming to Brown changed my life. And I was embattled with Brown because Brown threw the book at us. Over 200 of us were arrested. And Brown's acquisition of these papers really made a huge difference to me personally in kind of mending fences with this institution, which was amazing, transformed my life, and showed me how to be a thinker, and showed me to be a fighter and to fight for the highest aspirations of humanity. But there was a contradiction, right? This was a ruling class institution and it excluded so many of us. So anyway, that's a long way of saying thank you to Brown for this moment. And thank you to the movement to free Mumia, which is here, because Mumia is alive because of the movement that coalesced around him to save his life.
So Johanna, I've only got like 19 pages of questions, so, and,
yeah. Okay.
and also I figure people want to get to the mic, so I'm just gonna see if I can just pipe back in, and we'll come back to you in a minute, because you said something really important that I want to come back to. But I'm wondering, Angela, if you could sort of speak to a little bit about, we'll come back to that broader gender question, but how does your work with political prisoners, which is so important and so complex, how does Mumia fit in that legacy of activism and writing in your life?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Johanna, she has done amazing work over the years. And thank you so much, Julia, for being here. And Julia has, held down the fort in Europe, which we'll be talking about. But may I just say a few words about the gender question?
Yeah, Jeff, we were going to come back to it.
Well, I think there are a number of answers, but the simple answer is that women have always been responsible for these movements, always. And I wanted to evoke my mother, who was an active member of the campaign to free the Scottsboro 9. And if you look at that case in the 1930s, 1940s, you'll find that it was also women who were doing the work, which isn't at all to say that people who identify as men weren't involved, certainly, but women's contributions were actively erased.
Right. Hey,
And that is, oh,
So
this is, sorry.
Mumia Abu-Jamal was supposed to call a lot later in our conversation, but he's here now.
Hello. On the move, y'all. I apologize for calling a little early, but as the old saying you get in where you fit in. So I fit in right now. Welcome to a night at Brown as we open the archives and thus print a new page in history. Isn't it amazing how our languages are encoded with gender? So much so that we're barely aware of it. In Spanish, nouns ending in an A are known as feminine. Similarly, nouns ending in an O are considered masculine. In French, nouns ending in an E are regarded as feminine. English has no such word endings. But look at the words themselves. For example, think of the word master. And automatically, don't you think of a man? The corresponding feminine term, mistress, doesn't equal master. Indeed, she serves him. Think of the word patron and matron. Same relation, the same encoding of power with gender and dominance. But words sometimes break through the bonds of tradition via the power of culture. Think Serena Williams on a tennis court. Master? Yup. Master of the court. And here, at what I call this convocation, we find masters. Dr. Angela Y. Davis, who faced 3 death penalties as a young woman, won acquittals, and returned to her profession and helped co-found Critical Resistance, and is known as a feminist abolitionist. A master? Yep.
Woohoo!
Pam Africa, known as the Minister of Confrontation of MOVE, who braved broken bones to fight for freedom, who lit the flames to organize family and friends of Mumia Abu-Jamal. That's me. I hope you've seen the tape and her in action tonight. Master organizer. Yep. And Julia Wright, poet, novelist, writer, and
This
thinker.
is a call from
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
From living in Ghana during the heyday of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, to her critical support to members and leaders of the Black Panther Party's international section in North Africa, Algiers, and later in Paris, to her years of support and organizing for the Mumia movement in France, to her present role as a brilliant, wise elder, poet, and guide to new generations of activists. Ain't she a master? Yep. A master of the bon mot, the word, the right word at the right time. Dr. Johanna Fernández, a Columbia-trained historian. After her first book was published, a rich study of the Puerto Rican revolutionary group, the Young Lords, she won a fistful of awards from professional historians like the Organization of American Historians. Ain't she a master historian? Yep. We are at a convocation of masters. And I, for one, thank all of you. with love, not fear. This is Mumia Abu-Jamal. Welcome.
Thank you.
Woohoo!
This is a call from
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
Okay, Mumia, we're doing this. Just very briefly, what does it feel like to have an institution like this one archive your life in prison?
You ever hear the saying, I didn't see this coming? It really feels remarkable. I could see something like perhaps the Schomburg or, a Black Historical Association like that. But this was not foreseen. But I think it was meant to happen. You were meant to be in the right place when they were asking you about your years at Brown. And you opened the door that now cannot be closed. So thank you. I mean, you helped make it happen.
Well, for the record, I asked the Schomburg. I asked folks in Philadelphia. And people were like, I'm Joe and I don't know. So it was really Brown that opened the door to this possibility, and the possibility of archiving the papers of prisoners across the country and hopefully the world. We gotta go, because we got business to take care of, but we love you.
Love you too, and I think it's very Brown of him. So, on the move.
Wait, say hello to Angela, just 1 second.
Hey, Mumia.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, can she hear me?
Yes.
Hey, how you doing, sister?
All right, that's all we got time for. Hasta la vista.
All right. So, Angela, I wouldn't interrupt you except for that.
No,
okay.
no.
I was like, okay, I got to tell her Mumia's on the phone.
Listen, I can sit here and listen to Mumia.
I know,
all
I
day
know,
long.
I know. So tell me, what was your feeling hearing what he's saying? I mean, why don't we come to this sort of sharing, about what hearing his voice in this context means? And we'll ask Julia and then come to you.
Well, I was just remembering the very first time I met Mumia when he was on death row. I was having the conversation with, what's her name who just introduced us? Nicole. Where's Nicole? Oh, there you are. Sorry, excuse me for talking about you in the third person like that. But we were talking about our experiences in meeting him, always, of course, behind bars. But I met him, I think it was either the late 80s or early 90s. And I had to sit in a cubicle where the two of us were separated by plexiglass. And, well, that's another story, because I can tell you many stories of talking to people from the other side as well. But what struck me was that within a very short period of time, I was no longer thinking about the obstructions. I was no longer seeing the plexiglass. Mumia made me feel as if we were engaging in another place, on another level. And I think what is so remarkable about him is, after all of these years, he continues to teach us how to engage at another level.
Right.
The walls drop. And I think that's probably why he has survived so long, thanks to the important work of all of the people who have been demanding his freedom for too many years. But whenever I see him, I feel as if I have been revitalized. I feel that I need to find new ways of addressing all of these issues. And one more thing, I told Tricia that if I go on to, reach into my words and find a way to steer me in another direction. But Mumia strikes me as someone who always eschews the kind of individualism that has been so fatal in many contexts. And as someone who has been involved in the struggles for freedom for many, many, many political prisoners, there's always the tendency to focus on the individual. But Mumia has always deflected attention away from himself as an individual to become the embodiment of larger issues, so that we always also think about other people, other contexts, other worlds.
Right, yeah, wow. Julia, I wanted to bring you in here. Can you hear me, Julia?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Good. Yes, I can. I think everyone can too. Great. I'm wondering if you could share your memory of your first impression of Mumia and what stood out for you, or perhaps even what stood out for you in terms of experience him and his voice in this setting on this day.
It's so typically him this evening. He is paying tribute to the masters. He leaves himself out. As Angela was saying, that is so typical of him. He is so self-effacing. And that reminds me of why he's behind bars, because the whole objective was to deprive us of our leadership. Mumia is our leader and our teacher. And the whole intention of the state was to deprive us of our government. And when I looked up the root meaning of the word archives, I found that's what it meant, government. Archive anciently means government. So what Johanna has done and what Brown has done, Brown University has done with Johanna and so many others that have helped, who have helped, is they have brought our leader and our teacher to us. And I wanted just to read a few lines of a letter I sent to Johanna. I know she won't want me to read this because she's very discreet, but I want to let her know. I wrote this to her when I first heard the news. Johanna to keep Mumia alive and to free him, you have made sure that the best brain children of one of the finest Black minds we have are alive and kicking for all to get to know. You have humanized Mumia, and you have turned him into his own character witness, as researchers will have at their fingertips the light he has been spreading to the voiceless from the darkness of his cell. With gratitude and love, we are so grateful because we have this narrative now. And it's not only Mumia's narrative, it's our narrative that has been given back to us. And this is something totally unexpected to me.
Wow, that's very powerful. Thank you. So Johanna, I want to move to another question for you because you actually answered this question before, which was part of what encouraged me. But I'm wondering, I think there's been an important reference to the role of the archive, to the historical record. Can you talk a bit more about how important it is to have a body of documents like this? We're sort of taking for granted, hey, we have his papers, they're going to do something really good. So, what, you know, and I want to really drill down because there's a tremendous volume of directions that things can go once you have these kinds of materials. As a historian, can you share a little bit about that?
Well, can you imagine a study of slavery without the slave narrative? I wasn't expecting this question, but there's been a lot written about imprisonment in the last 20 to 30 years. Most of it comes from scholars and journalists.
Right.
And who better than to talk about the torture of imprisonment than the imprisoned themselves? The reason why the United States has been able to imprison so many people is because they've been able to depict the Black and brown people behind bars as menaces to humanity. People that are disconnected from family, from friends, from spouses. And what bringing in the voice of the prisoner does is that it returns humanity to those our society has dehumanized, criminalized, demonized for a purpose beyond our safety. And I mean, the Brown press release, I thought was phenomenal, the one that announced the acquisition of the archive. And part of what it said is that in a country that has imprisoned so many of its citizens, you can't really understand our society without hearing from that segment of the population. And it's an important conversation because it's not just about the prisoner. This erosion of freedom through the repression of others actually erodes the standard of freedom for all of us.
Absolutely, critically important. There's been a lot of pressure to demonize, as you point out, not only the constituencies, but people who are movements are focusing on, right? To say that there can't be this value that's important to the people that are leaders, who people are engaged with. But what do you think accounts for the distinction between very sort of, anti-abolition, say a conservative side, versus a liberal community who is also sort of anxious or pushing back against the alternative record that the archive can generate? How do you see this political moment and this sort of tension as playing a role. Angela, maybe that'd be something you might want to speak to. And of course, anything else you want to speak to. It's perfectly welcome.
Yeah, this is a complicated moment. Because we still have a very clear memory of a moment in which vast numbers of people were persuaded that we were going to make concrete steps forward with respect to the racist-inflected repression emanating from the police and other institutions of state violence. That was just a couple of years ago, right? And I'm hesitating because I've been thinking over the last period that those of us who do radical organizing work, who fight for the release of Mumia, but will not stop with the freedom of one individual, but rather link that to systemic racism, link that to the racism in the healthcare system, as we learned to do during the experience of the pandemic. And then within a relatively short period of time, we had the other voices arising. And I hesitate because I think we should have been able to predict exactly what happened. And so often, when as radical movements we do begin to achieve victories, we seem to be surprised when the backlash occurs. But that is a part of the movement of history. And I say this because we have persuaded ourselves that this is a totally different moment, that somehow all of that revolutionary energy has been completely suppressed. And you know, those who represent the ultra-right are in the forefront now. And I say that because I don't really believe that they are the majority. They are still a relatively small minority. And when one examines the changes that have occurred, massive changes have taken place, even though there's pushback within institutions where those changes have happened. But who could have imagined Brown University acquiring the papers of Mumia Abu-Jamal 10 years ago? But of course, you know, when we consider that, you know, Brown is an important institution. Ruth Simmons was the president of this university. So I'm just trying to complicate the way we experience history and the way it unfolds. And I think that that as people who identify with progressive and radical causes, we should learn how to stand up and defend what we're fighting for. And when we win victories, we have to recognize them, and we have to learn how to immediately move on without waiting to be surprised by the inevitable backlash, and without waiting to be convinced that we really have relatively little power. And I think that we really should have taken advantage of the fact that there was a period when the police were on the defensive,
Right.
all over the country.
Right.
You know, when the power that's wielded by organizations like the Fraternal Order of the Police and Police Benevolent Association and all of those police formations that have been responsible for the worst kinds of attacks on the integrity of Mumia. The reason, you know, why he is almost always defined as a cop killer. So, I mean, that's me.
Yeah. No, I
I'm
think
ranting about this these days because I do think we have to learn how to claim our victories.
Yeah. But what you're also saying, in addition to claiming victories, is that you're suggesting that this is a long-term pattern of victories with backlash, and the nature of the backlash, while it changes, is not so fundamentally different. The terms of resistance are turned into the terms of domination, right? Freedom, say, for example, any number of, defund the police, right? Woke. So this idea to change and to propel the other side is very important. But you're describing a thing that happens over time. And why that matters to me is because all of you have been involved in this campaign and other ones like it for decades and decades. And I think for a variety of reasons, many people who are not heavily into movements of that length see this whole thing as a sort of victory and loss. And you write about this frequently. It's not about the battle at the moment. It's a long kind of transformation of the place the battle happens, how the battle is constructed, so that then you'd already have a group of people sitting around with like, hey, what do you think the backlash is going to look like? You know, like before, right? Because there's a long-term approach. So I'm wondering, Johanna, if you could speak a little bit to how archives help movements understand that length of time. You see what I mean? Because if you don't know what happened, and Angela, you have the mic always. So, but anybody who wants to jump in, because I think this is important. The archive isn't just about, hey, what research is going to happen, but how it changes people. Here, you can have this.
Oh, you're not going to drink your water?
I have my BYO, you know. I never know what's going to happen in life.
I know,
I've always got a bottle of water. I have my own.
The reason I didn't bring a bottle of water on stage was because I'm trying not to drink water out of plastic.
Oh yeah, well, that's a good point.
And
She says with a plastic bottle. And I've reused it like 20 times, but that's my healthy excuse right there. No, but I think archives are more important. I don't know, Julia, you seem to be really getting us to think about the denial of information as a political control model. How do you see this archive or any other radical archive interrupting that over a length of time? Do you see what I mean? That there's, because you really talked a lot about that too, that this is about an ongoing pattern.
I mean, this is so new. I don't want to come out with any thoughts that might be too my thoughts are half-baked. I'm far away. I suffer from a syndrome, and that's I think it's a very special syndrome. It's the inability to be able to consult one's own family's papers, because I can't travel to consult my father's papers, for instance. What, for the moment anyway, medically speaking, what I am very sensitive to, and I've been asking everybody at Brown about, to the point where I think they think I'm obsessed about it, is what percentage of the archives are photocopied? In other words, what percentage of the archives are subjected to the law passed by the Department of Corrections, I believe beginning 2013, which subjects prisoners to receiving their correspondence, photocopied, scanned, because, of course, prisoners indulge in drug smuggling through letters, which is absolutely nonsense. And to me and to all abolitionists, but first of all to the prisoners, it is torture not to be able to touch the letters that loved ones send you. So my question was, what percentage of the archives is in that state? And the response I got was about 10% because it's only beginning 2013. So I sent a message to Mumia. I don't know if I have his response here. I wrote it down somewhere. I asked Mumia, how did you experience being exposed to photocopies only? And this is what he replied. Actually, I'm glad I got his reply because they could have confiscated it. But this is what he replied. Quote, several months ago, an unnamed staff member here got busted for bringing in the largest amount of drugs in the history of the Department of Corrections, worth, I'm told, over $250,000. So much for drugs, eh? For such a pretext, a mother's letter written by her hand is imprisoned in a database for 7 years, Xeroxed, duplicated, and mailed as an open sheet letter attached by staples to a copy of the envelope. Cruel, unusual. So it's that sensory deprivation. And if I could just end by saying I was mesmerized because I was given a visual tour of the exhibit, and I thank the Brown staff. I thank Jasmine and Christopher for having enabled that. And they drew a curtain aside, and there was the replica of the cell that Mumia occupied for almost 3 decades on death row. And I was just mesmerized by that cell because it gave a perspective to everything else in the exhibit. But then I realized something looking at the cell or the replica of it. I realized that although we could be shown the restriction of space in the cell, how small it was, how solitary it was, we were not given the ticking time. And that time factor is what you've been talking about, Angela. The time that unfolds outside and the time that unfolds inside. And how we, as minorities, deal with time because we hail back to slavery. And people say on the outside, oh, they have prescience, like my father was prescient. But we're not prescient. Things haven't changed, that's all. It's still the same. There's no prescience there. So the time factor is what came across to me. when I watched the exhibit. I don't know if that's an answer to your question, Tricia.
It's a fantastic answer. Angela, did you want to, it seems like you were thinking together there for a minute.
No. I was just thinking about your remarks about time, Julia, and how punishment is conceived in accordance with time. Because, what do you do when you go to prison? You do your time. But that time, when I went to jail, I'll just tell you the story. I remember I was, the first week, I said to myself, I have been in jail a whole week. Because I'd been in jail before, but only for a few days for demonstrating and things like that. And so a week seemed like a long, long time. But then I realized as the time passed, it was basically the same day over and over again. So, at the end of a year, it was as if I had only been inside a few days. So there's this kind of, bizarre temporality, the temporality of punishment. But I was also thinking about the fact that time that you get sentenced in accordance with time, it also reveals something about the abstraction, the abstractness of punishment as conceived under conditions of capitalism. So if we had time, we could talk about the way in which the commodity is, for those of you who are interested in, Marxist critique of political economy, and the fact that it's not accidental that the penitentiary was born in the country that was developing capitalism. Of course, we talk about democracy, but it was capitalist democracy.
Yeah, no.
So
Yeah, that's really, that's not just a lot. It's just, I'll keep moving.
you asked me what I was thinking about.
I don't want to take time away from you all answering more questions.
Are prisons obsolete is what you need to read to get to that.
Definitely.
A synopsis of that argument. In Angela Davis's brilliant Are Prisons Obsolete?
Absolutely. So listen, I'm wondering if we can turn a little bit to this abolition feminism. Because my first question was just a gendered question, but then Mumia Abu-Jamal called in, so we kind of lost that whole thread. But I want us to come back to it because abolition feminism is a really important framework that I don't think the contradictions and complexities of are fully sort of attended to. And I think you all have been talking about contradictions and collaborations and living with that sense of lack of resolution, even within a movement where the overall goals may be quite clearly identified. Everyone's not getting there necessarily the same way. So what is it about the vision of abolition feminism that is particularly productive and enabling in the ways that it is? And Angela, I'm going to start with you and then Johanna, come to you.
Well, you know that I just recently participated in the writing of a book that is called Abolition Feminism Now. And I hesitate because there's a period after abolition. There's a period after feminism, a period after now. And I think that what was the most important insight in writing that book was that sometimes one does not know in advance how something is going to turn out. Yeah, 30 minutes till Q&A. I saw it a little while ago. I just wanted to acknowledge it. That abolition is a feminist project. Often we think about abolition as following the kind of patriarchal line of prison work, and of course, the majority of people who are in prison identify as men. However, who does that institution most impact? And so we began to, think about the fact that prison work has, in many ways, always been women's work. Who are the people you see in the visiting room, regardless of the gender of the person who is in prison. But also, we wanted to think about feminism as not having a particular gender, because we always somehow assume that feminism is not so much a methodology, a way of looking at the world, but it is attached to the bodies of the particular people who are thinking or acting or organizing or whatever. And abolition, as it has come to unfold over the period, over this first few decades of the 21st century, has definitely been a feminist project. And I can tell you that when we were, you spoke about critical resistance, when we were organizing critical resistance in 1997 and the first part of 1998, we really worked hard to think not primarily about gender, but about feminism, about thinking contradictions, about thinking things together that are not usually thought together. Modes of theorizing and methodologies that have come out of feminism that everybody needs to employ if we're going to move in a liberatory direction. So you see this, you ask these huge questions.
Because I love your huge answers. It's like a great treat. Johanna, many people here may have not necessarily recently read your piece in the Feminist Wire, and it speaks to this question of the role of gender in Mumia's sort of case and circumstance. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that, because I think that will give us another perspective on this question of gender and feminism and organizing, et cetera.
Well, as Angela is speaking, I'm thinking that the prison is organized in very gendered ways. Both women's prisons and men's prisons. And the propaganda and the ideology of imprisonment, the language of law and order in the world that justifies the hyper-incarceration of Black and brown people is also very gendered. And so part of what I do in this article I wrote a long time ago, which I just read today because I had forgotten, it's called Silencing the Record, is that I explore the ways in which the widow of Officer Faulkner, the officer that Mumia is accused of killing, Maureen Faulkner, is used by the state as a prop to build the apparatus of mass incarceration and also to bury the possibility of Mumia's freedom. She's depicted as the white widow that needs rescuing from the state and from all Americans. And I ask, well, why don't we hear from Mumia Abu-Jamal's wife, Wadia Jamal? Why don't we hear from, in the media, from Lydia Barashengo, Mumia's sister? Because if we hear from the families, from the women of people who are imprisoned, we'll get a completely different understanding of the problem and the imprisoned. So it was from Lydia Barashengo that I heard when I was making the film Justice on Trial, that if the state didn't have Maureen Faulkner, the weeping widow, they wouldn't have a stone to stand on, because the case is riddled with lies and with prosecutorial misconduct. It's a case that doesn't stand. It was Lydia Barashengo who told me that their mother, Lydia Barashengo is the sister of Mumia, and their mother was orphaned. And because of that, she wasn't a particularly loving person. And Mumia was the one who brought love and affection to the home and to her. Mumia would grab her up and force her to hug him. This is in the context of a discourse around Mumia that's organized around the cop killer, right? So when we hear from different voices, feminist voices, we really get a completely different perspective on the demonized, on the criminalized. I would like to, for a minute, talk about the term cop killer. Because I think it adds to this conversation of how the state was able to build this apparatus of mass incarceration. In the post-civil rights movement era, after the Black Panthers, in fact, challenged the role of the police in American society, exposed the role of the police as the institution that essentially is responsible for protecting private property and for keeping people at the bottom of society in their place. They did that through the term pig, which essentially, according to the Black Panthers, they used in order to neutralize the sense that the cops are all powerful. In the aftermath of that victory, right, that there was a shift in consciousness in Black communities around their relationship with the police, when the movement declines, there's a backlash, and the police proceed to take the offensive, and they use the term cop killer, and cop killer becomes the new crime that replaces the mythological rape of white women as the crime for which Black men in particular can be railroaded and lynched. What's fascinating is that the majority of people who kill cops in American society are white men, like statistically. But this term cop killer is used in racialized ways to instill fear in America in the post-Black Power era, to keep people like Mumia Abu-Jamal in prison, people who resist politically, who are dissidents, but also to manipulate white fear around the issue of crime. If they kill cops, they're definitely prepared to kill us. So this term cop killer is bandied about, and it's used strategically and carefully to punish, really, Black people for having dared defend themselves against police brutality in a very structured and deliberate and organized way in the 1960s. And we haven't seen that kind of challenge to the police, its authority, and its place in American society until the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, which did something different. It actually educated Americans about the origins of the police in America, tied to returning enslaved people back to the plantation under slavery. And the kind of backlash that we're seeing today to the Black Lives Matter movement is tied to the re-strengthening of the police, for example, through the building of Cop City in Atlanta.
Absolutely.
And may I just say that when Julia, talked about the fact that her father was called prescient, or that she's sometimes called prescient, and she pointed out that it's not prescience, it is understanding the way history unfolds. And as Johanna was talking about what Frederick Douglass called the imputation of crime to color, I was remembering how that repetitiveness appears largely because we don't manage to solve the problems, or we misconstrue the problems in the first place. We thought slavery was abolished, or we believed the ideology that slavery was abolished. And of course, we recognize in many ways now that slavery is incorporated into the very warp and woof of the fabric of this country. So I just wanted to thank you for making the point of the continuity of history, but it's our job to create ruptures. It's our job to stop that pattern of repetition.
I think this might be a good time to play the clip that we prepared for tonight, because Pam Africa, the fierce woman who has kept this movement alive for 42 years, was not able to make it tonight. And I thought that we should play a clip from the film I worked on titled Justice on Trial, The Case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Pam is a fierce orator, a fierce freedom fighter, and this does not do justice to her work. But in this clip, she is in the local Fox News channel in Philadelphia. And she's speaking alongside of the head of the Fraternal Order of Police. And they're talking about a concert that was canceled in New Jersey, Rage Against the Machine. The music group is hugely supportive of Mumia. And there's a controversy about this rock group that supports a cop killer. And you'll see how Pam Africa handles the matter.
Oh, yeah, not at all, or just late? Not at all. Okay, we got no audio. Do you want to
Okay.
describe it a little bit? You set it up so perfectly. I feel like I have to see the clip.
Well,
So-
well, of course, part of what the police do, and the head of the Fraternal Order of Police, is that they condemn Rage Against the Machine for their lyrics and for the song Killing in the Name. And there's another song. And the cops say this is a hate group put to guitar music. We're not talking about Peter, Paul, and Mary. These are people who are spewing hate and who are about cop killers. And Pam says...
The cops said we're not talking about Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Yeah, the cops say this. And Pam says, here you have these bullies who are distorting the truth and reality. This song is about the cops killing Black children in the streets, but they've distorted and mangled reality, and are blaming this group for, in fact, the terror that they deploy against our communities. And we applaud Rage Against the Machine for standing up to us. Is this it?
I don't have any idea.
What's going on?
Oh, it looks, is this?
Oh, this is it. Do we have music? Oh, that's it. Do we have sound?
Is that, do you have it or no? Do you?
Okay, we're in 21st century America here. We should be able to play a clip.
Rock group that came to Philadelphia. They performed
Wait,
the first
from the
Symposium
beginning.
Center.
From the beginning. We got to play it from the beginning. And loud. We need more sound. Thank you.
Anybody who supports this killer is tacitly saying that they sanction the murder of police officers.
Let's talk a little about what happened this week. Rage Against the Machine is a rock group that came to Philadelphia. They performed at the First Union Center.
Well, we don't have a rock group here. We have a hate group put to guitar music. Two of their biggest hits are Killing in the Name and Bullet in the Head. We're not talking Peter, Paul, and Mary here.
Across the country, it represents a case of justice denied. There's no new evidence, and all the evidence presented remains uncontroverted. And still, the system has not had the integrity to carry out the verdict. If it had been a murdered judge, the guy would have been executed 20 years ago.
This man has just sat here and lied. Bullet in the Head is about cops killing Black men, shooting them in the head. Rage did make it very clear that they are not about cop killers. And you know that they are calling for a new trial for Mumia Abu-Jamal. They made it very plain. And again, this is the intimidation that these people have used on people like Veronica Jones. They're talking about the FOP history, this government history. And again, it points to what liars and bullies these people are.
This is complete, utter, absurd nonsense. This continually repeating call for a new trial is a cheap charade. If Jamal publicly admitted what he did and apologized to the Faulkner family for the horror he's put them through for 18 years, I think this issue would be put to rest.
There was a sentence, Julia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I was looking, I guess I want to get everyone's response to this for a moment, but I mean, especially Pam is just, remarkable. It's hard to imagine that level of conviction on, nightly news right about now, even if someone felt it, right? It seems light years ago in terms of political directness and fire. But what was your sense? How did you feel about that clip? And it's
I'd like to use Mumia's words because she is the mother of the movement. And Mumia wrote a beautiful piece a few years ago called Movement Pains. And that makes me think that Mumia sees the movement as a woman and as a mother. And probably Pam. I just read these lines because I can't paraphrase Mumia. His words are too beautiful. I call this movement pains. Every social movement begins in pain. When people see or experience social injustice, movements are born. This should surprise none of us, for our mothers brought each of us forth at the crucible between death and life. This is Pam, and she's the Mother Earth of our movement. And I know she's here. I know she's with you, and I hope she's hearing this. We love her, and it's a beautiful thing what she's done, because she's brought us forth into the movement. She's nurtured our resistance and our resilience like plants that we are. And she's lying fallow for a bit, like the Mother Earth she is. And we love her. That's what I wanted to say.
Julia, I remember when I went with Pam and other representatives from MOVE to Strasbourg to a United Nations session. I think it must have been in the early 90s. And then I'm thinking about how the movement to free Mumia Abu-Jamal developed in France. And thanks to so much of the work that you did, Julia. Do you know that Mumia received honorary citizenship of Paris? Do you know who the only other person at that time to have been granted honorary citizenship of the city of Paris was? Pablo Picasso.
Yes. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And wow, please let me do something live here. You have an invitation, Angela, to Paris from the Angela Davis High School. They want to invite you. They are, as you know, in the suburb of Saint-Denis, right around the corner of Mumia Street.
That's what
They're a few meters away. So we have an enclave in Paris, an African-American enclave with your high school and the Mumia Street. The only thing that happened is, and that's not a bad thing, when the rebellions happened in the month of June in Paris, with the youth in the suburbs rising after young Nahel was lynched, somebody close to the government decided they didn't like the name Angela Davis for that school. And she called Madame Valérie Pécresse debaptized the school that was named after you. So these are young kids, young students who have no toilets to speak of, I mean, it's like a rundown school where a typical meal will be like chips and a little bit of salad, like you might serve in a prison, right? They are fighting tooth and nail to keep your name, Angela, up on the top of that school. and they are inviting you to visit them. So I thought maybe it would be a right thing for you to encourage what they're trying to do. But I have such a message of, okay, maybe I'm sounding ridiculous, but let me go ahead. I am full of hope of what's happening because the youth in France rebelled. In Montana and Hawaii, kids won constitutional right to a human climate. The children of the uranium miners in Niger are the ones who went in front of the French embassy. And today, the French are leaving Niger. In Cup City, it's the youth. So all over the world, I mean, Africa is basically 50%, 70% under the age of, I believe, 20 years old. So what's happening is we're seeing, as we saw before, and as Angela said, we're seeing with climate change, with the pandemic, with baby lizards being born with senescent genes, we're seeing the uprise of the youth again. And I'm so full of hope that these archives will be accessible to students and youth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julia. So we are going to spend about the next 15 minutes or so in Q&A. There are 2 mics in the 2 aisles. If you could generally evenly share them, that would be great. And try not to make your question too long so we can get as much of an answer as possible. While they're moving up, I think it's so important because, these archives are really, what Julia just said is so critical. The archives are what the young people will have about what happened before. And it's going to be really important. All right, how are we doing? Okay, let's start to my right and just give your name quickly and let us know what's on your mind.
Yeah, my name is Nasma. I am a 3rd-year law student at Roger Williams. I'm actually the vice president of our Black Law Student Association. The president's right behind me. I'm actually doing my research paper on the sentencing disparities among Black people within the criminal justice system here. And this is open to any of you. I was wondering what your thoughts are on mass incarceration and the history of mass incarceration being retaliation for legally ending the enslavement of Black people.
Angela, why don't we just have you really quick?
Well, okay, I can just say very briefly, I think it's important when we use the term mass incarceration, and mass incarceration is included in the title of Voices of Mass Incarceration, right? That we remind ourselves that we're not only against mass incarceration, that we're also against incarceration writ large. And of course, if one wants to understand the role of systemic racism in the criminal legal system, what we generally call criminal justice, but language changes, and I think we're getting used to calling it the criminal legal system now, because there isn't justice really in that system. That the sentencing disparities reside at the very core of that punishment project. And I'm thinking about the fact that under the institution of slavery, when the death penalty was, when there was actually, interestingly, a campaign against the death penalty, because many people argued that if democracy were going to be constructed here, then that would have to involve getting rid of a form of punishment that they did not feel was appropriate for a democratic framework. But that was a minor voice. And the point that I'm making is that if you look at how the law evolves, you'll see that the relationship of law and punishment, that the death penalty was actually increasingly marginalized, so that only people who were convicted of murder, and in some cases rape, there were only a couple of offenses for which the death penalty could be used. This is as a consequence of a mass movement against the death penalty. But this was just for white people. At the same time, in slave law, the death penalty continued to be an appropriate sentence for 40, 50, 60, 70 different offenses committed by black. This is something that actually Frederick Douglass writes about as well. I think Frederick Douglass must be with us today. His spirit today. Yeah, I think it's really important to look very specifically at the harm that is being done and to address that. And I'm talking about the harm that is being done to those who fall into the system.
That's right.
And at the same time, to imagine the possibility of of safety and security that does not have to rely on these institutions of violence and repression. Because I think it's clear that one of the reasons our society is so violent, and we're constantly reminded about the violence in our lives, in our communities, in our homes, that has a great deal to do with the institution of the prison and the institutionalized policing in this country. So I'm suggesting, look at it very carefully, but at the same time, think about the broader consequences.
Thank you. We'll take a question on the other side now. Thank you. And any one of you can answer this, Johanna, anyone.
Hi, my name is Garrett Brand. I'm a second-year student here at Brown. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. You mentioned Cop City briefly. I've got my t-shirt here that I made in the back of a church back home. But you were mentioning the connection between Mumia, who is obviously a political prisoner, and sort of the state repression that we can see being leveraged at activists nowadays, specifically in the struggle in Atlanta to stop Cop City, which for folks who don't know is a $90 million militarized police training center the city's trying to build in the middle of a critical forest ecosystem in a low-income black neighborhood. That's the short version of it. But I was wondering if you could unpack that connection between the legacies of state repression and political imprisonment we've seen with people like Mumia historically, and the modern repression leveraged by the state, and more specifically, like, what can we do in the face of that repression?
Thank you for the question, and also thank you for the work that I'm sure you're connected to in Atlanta, which is at the cutting edge of what we need to do to defend our right to protest. I'll say this, that if you look at American history, the government has always put on show trials. We saw that in Salem, Massachusetts, the witch trials. We saw that in the late 19th century with the Haymarket martyrs. I think 9 of them were rounded up, arrested, and 4 of them were executed for being anarchists, labor organizers, socialists in a burgeoning labor movement. In the 1920s, we saw the execution of Italian anarchists Sacco and Vanzetti in the context of another rising labor movement that included the Wobblies. Then the Rosenbergs, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, were executed in the 1940s in the aftermath of the largest labor upheaval in US history that led to mass unionization of at least white workers. And in the 1960s, there's an upheaval of Black people, working Black people, and Mumia becomes the case, the show trial case the state uses to essentially suggest to working people, people who are discontented, this is what will happen to you if you dare stand up for yourself. And I think that the United States is currently probably looking for the show trial they're going to use to show your generation what might happen to you if you dare resist. Of all of those cases I've identified, Mumia is the only show trial case wherein the prisoner was not executed. And that's because of the international movement that rallied to defend his life in the 1990s when he was facing execution. I think what we need to do is send the message to the state through organization that we have the right to defend ourselves, that we have the right to defend our humanity, and to fight for a better world. We need to do that collectively, because individually, the message doesn't get to the places where it needs to get. But when folks gather, as they did during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations of summer 2020, cataclysmic change happens in society very quickly.
Yeah, terrific, thank you. Yes.
Hi,
Thank you.
My name is Lindsay. I also go to Roger Williams. I am the VOICES president. First of all, I want to commend you, not that you need any acknowledgement from me, but the concept of fighting is, you have to fight because it's just, for Black people specifically, it's something that's engraved in us, but people don't often talk about the solitude and the loneliness aspect of it, where you feel as though you're doing it alone, and you got, well, most of the panelists have been doing it for their lives, so I want to just acknowledge that, because it would be amiss if I didn't. I wanted to make mention, as my vice president was saying, we have, luckily enough, we were talking about mass incarceration, but incarceration at our Race and Foundations of American Law class. One of our actual professors / Ardena students is here. We were wondering / hoping for you to attend our school. I think I'm supposed to direct this towards you, to attend our school to talk, because if we don't continue this conversation as we've spoken about at this panel, it kind of just dies away and we forget about it. So I think I'm supposed to do it towards you, but I do want to acknowledge you because the conversation was great and it's important to have.
Thank you, that's really, really lovely. Yes.
Hello, I just wanted to take the time to say thank you to all the panelists for being here. Being in your presence and hearing everyone speak and talk about their stories and advocacy, especially for Mumia, is just absolutely amazing. My name is Naya Muir. I'm a first year here at Brown University. And so my kind of question and also piece is kind of directed specifically towards Ms. Davis. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your decades of sacrifices and influence and unrelinquishing love for our people. From the moment I was introduced to your work as a little girl and just seeing your face in the midst of the American struggle, I knew I would dedicate my life to aspire to your level of advocacy. And if you cannot hear it in the words that I speak, I hope that you see it in the emotion in my face, how much you mean to me and my identity as a Black woman. And but out of all the things that you've done, I would say simply seeing you in your afro and the pictures of you during the movement, it just, as someone who grew up resenting my curls and my hair, seeing you at the center of the fight, it meant everything to me. And with that all in mind, my question would be, as a first-year student here at Brown University, there are so many different social movements that are pulling me in so many different directions and so many people that I want to fight for. But I would say I'm coming up here and asking for your advice. How would you suggest that the mindset that I should have, how I should ground myself being the youth that I am with the next 4 years, my journey at this institution, and also just preparing myself for the world beyond Brown? How do you suggest I should take into account what should be my priorities, my values, etc.? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the question. But I do want to respond to one thing you thanked me for. You thanked me for all of my sacrifices. I don't really feel as if I've made any sacrifices. I don't think that I could have led my life in a more fulfilling way, in a more joyful way as well. And one of the things I like to emphasize is that the extent to which our movements have created joy, have created art, have created music. But when we talk about those movements, we act as if it's like just sacrifices and glum faces and I, like I said, I really don't feel as if I have made any sacrifices. Even going to jail, I recognize now, looking back at that period, that was a real gift. That was a gift that I had the opportunity to spend some time. I mean, I was in jail less than 2 years, but it did help me to find my life's work. And I don't know whether that would have happened in the same way had I not gone to jail. And if you think about the way in which you were talking about Black people and the connection between struggle for, on behalf of everyone, struggle for radical democracy, struggle for freedom. That has happened not only because of standing up to the worst kinds of violence, and we tend to think only about the violence, only about the oppression. We don't think about the beauty that was generated in the process of figuring out how to resist. And not only figuring out how to resist, but how to make that a lasting impulse that moves from generation to generation to generation to generation. Why do you think Black music is so popular all over the world? It's precisely because the impulse to struggle for freedom is within that music, which is also a message that we have to learn how to enjoy the resistance. And we can't think of it as just sacrifice. Okay. I said it.
We have maybe 5 or 6 minutes. We're not going to possibly get to all of these people. So if you could, everyone make it super short. We'll go as fast as we can, but I'm on a clock and I've got people watching me. So let's,
I'll
yes.
speak quickly.
Thank you.
First, I just want to acknowledge the amount of profound beauty in this room. It's amazing, and what that first receiver just said, really almost brought me to tears. But anyways, this is a question directed to all of the panelists. My name is Dre. I am a second-year ethnic studies student here at Brown. And as you were speaking about Brown acquiring the archive, I've been thinking a lot about archives and museums and what it means to acquire these things as objects and how in that process they become commodified. And I think that I'm a little bit scared, and I have fears that the acquisition of this archive and even the word acquisition, objectifying it, that this will be reduced to something that is owned by the elitist structures on which we sit. And so two conflicting things for me that were happening here is yes, this is a radical liberatory act to come together and talk about this, to acquire this archive. But that being said, Brown was partially built by enslaved people. And so my question is then, what is implicated in Brown acquiring these archives and controlling access to them? Does that take away from the arms, does that take away the archives from the arms of the people that they're intended for? And in that way, what makes an archive radical?
Great, thank you. That was great. We maybe only one person for each question otherwise. So Johanna, would you like to speak to that?
Okay, so the things of people at the bottom of society, racially oppressed people, formerly enslaved people, working people, are rarely preserved. They're preserved in a very precarious way. The fact that these papers, 97 boxes of them, are going to be preserved is epic. The prison was forcing Mumia to get rid of them when he got off death row in 2011. And in a conversation I had with him over the course of a week, I was like, you can't throw them away. You cannot. And he was like, but they're forcing me. And tug of war. So this is epic, and it's a victory. It would not have happened without all of the struggles since the 1990s when that conference happened against the prison industrial complex. What we do on campus and in Providence and the nation to force Brown to continue to make these archives available to ordinary people across the country. There is a proposal to have Philadelphia children and high school students have access to this archive, to make this archive of imprisoned people, because it's not just Mumia. There is a little cachet of letters written by sex workers. We need to make these records available to everyone, the most publicly available records in the country. And I just want to tell a very quick story. Someone emailed Mary Murphy, who's hugely responsible for coming after me about my papers and staying on me when I went incognito on her a number of times, I'm sure. So we have these archives because of Mary Murphy and our relationship. But someone, so yes. And Amanda Knox archived them, organized them, and that was a very emotional and long and complicated process. But someone called your parents who had an imprisoned son when this hit the news and said, oh my God, our humanity is being acknowledged in the newspaper through these papers. So yes, Mumia is Brown is a ruling class institution, but ordinary people, people at the bottom of society, students, can force institutions to make good on the promise of liberation and access and democracy.
All right. Great.
May I just add
yes, please, go ahead.
I just wanted to say to the person who asked that question that, you know, we never work within a pure context. We always work with and within contradictions. And we have to learn how to embrace that as the work that we do, because if we can't work among the mess that society presents us, then we'll never be able to get rid of it.
Hi, my name is Sanai Rashid, and I'm a first-year student at Brown, curious in studying English and history. And I just want to thank you all for telling your stories, because every day I have a poster of you, Angela, in my room. It reminds me that I have a story too that deserves telling, and we all have stories that we deserve to tell. So as a writer, specifically to Angela, yourself, I'm curious about how writing about your lived experiences and advocacy, both as a forefront of movements and simply just a human being, experiences isms on a daily basis, has provided catharsis or a new space to process how you move about the world and how you impact others. What pushes you to keep telling your story through this narrative?
Well, you know, I never really wanted to do that because I didn't want people to confuse the story of one individual with the story of a movement in which vast numbers of people participated. And it was Toni Morrison who convinced me that I could find a way to do that. And now I'm, you know, then I said, who writes an autobiography in their 20s? That makes no sense at all. But recently I had to read the entire book for the audio version. There's a lot, you know, I cringed a lot because it was written so many decades ago. But I really appreciated the fact that you know, someone did tell me to sit down, to stop and think for a while and to record. And that was Toni. You know, and I just, I think I want to use this opportunity to say that many people are not aware of the fact that Toni Morrison made very explicit decisions about how she was going to move the struggle forward. You know, she said she wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed going to demonstrations and marches, although she did when it really mattered. You know, she came out. But she said that's not what she felt her best contribution could be. Her best contribution could be through her writing and through her editing. And so she chose to help create a historical record while she was an editor at Random House. And I'm not the only person she approached. And she said, she told you have to write her story. This is another subject, of course. But you know, I'm glad I did do that because it reminds me how much we've changed and how much we've learned. You know, I also thank Mumia for the writing that he's done. He's offered us so much during the decades that he's been behind bars. His writing practice is a freedom practice. It's about learning how to be free intellectually. It's learning how to lead the life of the mind under conditions that are designed to completely destroy the mind, the spirit. And so let's not forget that he has consistently written, how many books has Mumia written?
14, 15 books in prison.
14 or 15 books behind bars. So.
You know, we're actually over time, and that's an incredible place to end. I'm super sorry we couldn't get to all these amazing questions. Could you all join me in thanking Julia, Johanna, Angela, Nicole, and everyone who brought the archive to Brown?
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. I want to thank all this audience for their enthusiasm, the brilliant panel, and I want to remind everybody that Mumia would say, with love and not fear, we come here for this 2-day symposium. So we hope this is not the only event you'll enjoy, but many. And in the spirit of that community, please join us at Sales Hall for a reception. Thank you so much and good night.